Nebraska's the test today. And the funny thing is, the right move for Dan Osborn might be exactly what gives Republicans the weapon to take him down. This is Senate Pickup Watch. Today, Democrats finally have to pick a lane, run their own candidate, step aside, or openly back him, and each choice changes the math.
Plus, a fresh Cook rating on Nebraska that I'm not sure even accounts for the independent variable. Let's get into it.
So the AP frame is sharp here. The thing Democrats are trying to solve for is the brand itself. That's a tougher claim than anything we've had this week.
And follow the logic. If Nebraska Democrats step aside for Osborn, they're admitting their own label is a net negative in the state. That's a structural admission, and it has consequences way past this seat.
Right, but watch who's making the call. The state party, Jane Klebe, and the DSCC are not running the same calculation. Klebe wants a path. The DSCC wants a marquee name on a banner.
And that DSCC instinct is exactly how you blow a winnable seat by nationalizing it.
Here's the paradox I keep coming back to. If Cindy Burbank steps aside and the lane fully clears for Osborn, does that lift his in-state fundraising ceiling? Or does it cost him the crossover credibility he built by not being a Democrat?
That's the trap. The cleaner the Democratic lane gets, the easier the Republican line writes itself. Fake independent who'll just caucus with Schumer. You hand them the nationalization argument for free.
An independent who needs Democrats to clear the field for him stops looking very independent.
Which is why the caucus question actually matters for the math. A Ricketts seat only flips if Osborn would caucus with Democrats, and he's only half answered that on tape.
Now the Cook rating. They've got Nebraska in their column with Ricketts running as the incumbent. I've been working off Sabato, so give me your read. Does Cook's framing even see Osborn properly?
That's my worry. Low-density red state numbers flatter the incumbent every cycle. If Cook's modeling a standard partisan baseline against a generic Democrat, they're not measuring the race that's actually on the ballot.
And Ricketts is a different animal than Fisher. Osborn's 2024 finish was against Fisher. Does that floor hold against a Ricketts who can self-fund into the stratosphere?
That's the harder test. A protest vote against Fisher is one thing. Ricketts buys his own air cover, so we find out fast whether that was a floor or a one-time spasm.
So put it on the net 4 board. Democrats need every toss-up. Republicans need one. Where does the Osborn scenario land?
Honestly, this is the surprise pickup slot, the seat the party half wrote off. But only if they hold their nerve and let him stay genuinely independent. Step aside too loudly and they launder their brand problem onto a candidate they don't control.
And that's the whole Nebraska bet in one sentence. The smart move and the fatal move might be the same move. We'll keep watching the filings. Cook Political Report writes,
appointed as a Republican to the United States Senate on January 12, 2023, to fill the vacancy caused by the resignation of Benjamin Sass. Took the oath of office on January 23, 2023. Subsequently elected in the November 5, 2024 special election to fill the unexpired term ending January 3, 2027.
Cook's got Nebraska down as incumbent running, Ricketts on the ballot, and the last general was 62.6%. That's the wall Osborn's running at.
62.6 against a generic Democrat. The whole Osborn theory is that the number cracks when the opponent doesn't have a D next to his name.
Right, but here's what bugs me about the Cook framing. It rates this as a Ricketts running race, full stop. Does that rating even account for the independent variable properly? Or is it just defaulting to the partisan baseline?
It's defaulting. And this is exactly where I think political media underrates candidate quality. The rating reads the incumbent's last margin and the PVI, not whether the challenger has a real lane. Ricketts is a different animal than Fisher, though.
Much harder animal. Self-funder, 2-term governor, never lost a race he wanted. Osborn's 2024 finish against Fisher was a respectable floor. Against Ricketts, that floor gets tested by a guy who can write himself a check the size of a small state's budget. When an independent pops up in a deep red state like Nebraska, how do Democrats decide whether to run their own candidate, get out of the way, or openly back the independent? And does any of that actually move the needle on who controls the Senate?
It's a genuinely new calculation for the party. Short version, the Democratic brand itself has become the variable they're trying to solve for. Per the Associated Press, Democratic leaders this midterm cycle are, in some cases, looking past their own party's candidates and, in their words, subtly encouraging or even openly promoting independents they believe can outperform the Democratic label in states like Nebraska and Alaska. The DNC and some Washington allies are quietly supporting that approach. The logic is straightforward. If a D next to a name costs you, say, 8 points in Nebraska before a single ad runs, then taking that label off a credible candidate becomes part of the strategy. In Nebraska specifically, the AP reporting points to Dan Osborn, a union worker and independent, as the kind of candidate this approach is built around, with a Democrat in that race expected to drop out ahead of November and clear the field. And per the Washington Examiner, Democratic operatives and aligned groups are showing this same openness across multiple states, Nebraska, Alaska, Montana, which signals it's becoming a coordinated posture instead of a one-off local accommodation.
But if everybody has to play along for this to work, meaning the actual Democratic nominee has to be willing to step aside, what happens when they don't?
That's where the strategy starts to grind. Reporting from the Bulwark notes that in Montana, Democratic officials briefly hoped their own party's candidate would drop out to clear the lane for an independent-friendly path. And it didn't happen cleanly, which is the crack in the model. The map math only improves if the field is actually clear. A three-way race in a deep red state can just as easily split the non-Republican vote and hand the incumbent an easier win. So, watch whether the DSCC gets more explicit about withholding resources from nominees in these states, because quiet encouragement and actual field clearing are very different levers.
Got thoughts on today's Senate Pickup Watch? A race we should be tracking? Or a correction we need to hear? Email us at senatepickupwatch@lanternpodcasts.com. You'll find links to all of today's stories in the show notes, so if one caught your ear, you can dig into the original reporting there. That's Senate Pickup Watch for today. This is a Lantern podcast.